Hello and welcome to the Doubt Society podcast, episode 3. Today I am very excited to announce that I will be in conversation with Thomas Sheedy. Thomas is the founder and president of Atheists for Liberty. Thomas, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. So just I guess a little bit of intro. I've been following your organization probably since around the time it was founded. I'm not sure exactly how I stumbled across it, but looking at your board of advisors, I'm sure somebody in that group might have shared it, or I might have come across it through there because so many people in that list I greatly admire. And so I started following the organization and it was all about it. And so I thought when I started a podcast, I was like, I wonder if Thomas would be willing to join me early on. So super glad to have you. So for those who don't know about Thomas Sheedy, they don't know about Atheists for Liberty. Would you start us off by telling us about your organization and why you
Yeah.
started
So,
it?
so first up, I want to say again, thank you so much for having me on the program. My name is Thomas Sheedy, everybody. I'm the founder and president of Atheists for Liberty. We're a 501c3 organization that stands for free speech, free thinking, and freedom for all. We have various principles and programs that we do, and we've been doing a rock solid job so far over nearly 2 years since our public debut, and um, we definitely had a lot of help from those advisors. Those advisors really came in, retweeted our stuff, really saw potential in what we're trying to do. We're anti-woke atheists who care about individual liberty. We want to promote a free exchange of ideas. We support and defend the Constitution of the United States. We want to uphold religious freedom and defend secular government. A lot of good classic, you could argue classically liberal principles that really do stand the test of time, and we want to really ensure that the fight to maintain those principles is still held very strong. So that's what we do at AFL. That's what we're about.
Yeah, that's great. So I share many of the same values, but I wanted to, before we get into kind of the values and
Mhm.
the nuts and bolts of Atheists for Liberty, I kind of wanted to hear your story. So what molded Thomas into the person that wanted to start something like this? So I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about your background in terms of
Mhm.
spirituality. Like, were you religious? Have you always been a non-believer? And then maybe after that transition into how you came to arrive at the political views
Mhm.
which you now hold.
Right. I guess going on to my religious background first, I was up until I was 15 years old. I was kind of like a milquetoast Catholic. I was raised in the Roman Catholic Church by family members. My mother is very devout. Always has, I think, always will be very Catholic. Yeah, that's in her nature. And she always wanted to drag us to church every Sunday. My father, he was kind of a little less milquetoast than me. He's a little more serious, obviously, about his faith. He's not an atheist either, but he's still Roman Catholic. I'm the only atheist in the family. So I was Catholic for 15 years. I was driven to church. I was taught that it's very important to be a believer, but I always really questioned the narratives of the Catholic Church. I always questioned, in my own mind at least, some of the tenets of Christianity and the benefits of belief, especially around the time when I was receiving my confirmation. I really started to question the idea of why is it that the Roman Catholic Church in the 21st century is still getting upset and using their feudal perspective to be mad about a secular government's take on gay marriage. This is around the time when gay marriage was a real hot debate in the United States, around 2011 to around 2013, 14. And I was still Catholic up until 2013, and I saw it as a ridiculous waste of time that the church was driving its resources into a cause that they were absolutely going to lose in. I also saw a lot of Gen Z people that I went to middle school and later high school with who didn't even take the tenets of Catholicism seriously, yet kept going to church only because their parents wanted them to go there, thus perpetuating religion and Roman Catholicism's life even further. So I was already really, come 2011, 2012, really questioning Catholicism. And I remember I was studying for a Regents exam back in 2013 this was my freshman year of high school, and I remember watching a Bill Maher clip I think this was one of his 2005 specials on YouTube, where he was talking about how just like you could drill poison and mercury out of your body, you can do the same thing for Catholicism. And the moment I saw that, that was really the moment I became an atheist. I actually remember that moment in time that I lost it all. And I ended up calling myself an atheist around a month or two later, and then got into the activism components and started to learn more about the atheist community. But that was it. That's how I became an atheist. So I was religious for 15 years, questioned the church, had that big moment, lost it all, and then I just started getting into organized atheism. So going into then some of my work inside of the atheist community, I later on when I started getting more involved in high school, I wanted to form a secular student alliance chapter at my school, but it's very culturally conservative, socially conservative. And this was during a completely different culture war just a few years ago. And there were some administrators and officials, even in a secular public institution, that didn't want to see an SSA chapter pop up. So I went through a lot of red tape and legal trouble to get this club established. And eventually, under threat of legal action from the Freedom from Religion Foundation and a few other groups, I got the club that I wanted, and I got a $5,000 scholarship. After I graduated high school, when I was 18 years old, I became president of the local American Atheist chapter in my area, the local atheist meetup group called the Long Island Atheists. I ran that for around a year and a half, and then moving on to university, I ended up seeing really having a full perspective on the decline of the atheist movement and the eventual death of the atheist movement um, through internal problems. I really saw this problem a few years prior, but I wanted to later on do something to rebuild the atheist community after that damage. So then I formed Atheists for Liberty. So that's just a very brief timeline
Yeah.
as to how I got to where I am today.
Yeah, so let's unpack a little bit of that. You said your mom's a Roman Catholic. My mom was
Yeah.
also raised as a Roman Catholic. Um, Everyone in my family is still religious. I'm also the sole non-believer.
There you go.
Um,
Yep.
as one would. I'll share just a little bit about my story. I went evangelical Christian my whole life, and was actually had decided to become a pastor and went to Bible college. Um,
Wow.
and yes, and while at university, I went through a deconversion process and stayed on actually at the university because I was already a couple years into my degree.
Right.
I really enjoyed what I studied, so I stayed and got a degree in biblical studies and theology and comparative religion. So I just want to share a little bit of that as like a point of solidarity there, but still the only one in my family who's a non-believer. Everyone else still very pious.
I
Uh,
actually have a quite a similar background in terms of you when it comes to university. Actually, I just graduated a few months ago, back in May. But
Congrats.
even I was in the middle of my undergraduate program. I was debating leaving because I thought, well, I'm just learning a bunch of social justice nonsense on the most part. I feel like I'm not actually learning much in the realm of things that could actually benefit my career in public policy or government or political science. And I'm just being told that, I am continuing a legacy of oppression due to my skin color. And this is at a public institution. This is not like a private school. This was at a accredited public institution that is receiving taxpayer money. So I debated leaving myself too, but I thought, okay, I'm already so far in, might as well just get the piece of paper and get out.
Yeah, and that's a real point of concern when I graduated. So I graduated college in 2016.
Mhm.
So you said your freshman year of high school was 2013. Was that what you
My freshman
said?
year of high school was 2013, so I
Okay.
graduated high school in 2016.
Yes, yeah. So we're 4 years. I'm just 4 years ahead of you there. 2013 was the year I also had my like deconversion, 2013, 14.
Mhm.
But I had, for the same reason, one of the big reasons I didn't go into graduate school was because I took a look at the state of academia and thought, why in the world would I want to go time myself in all of that? So I completely understand where you're coming from there because it's we can talk about that a little bit later on, maybe about with what's going on in Austin. But before we get to there, so you said,
Mhm.
I just want to go back to this a little bit. You said that you heard that Bill Maher quote, and that kind of you realized that you were able to, you could just dispense with it. It didn't have to be something that was constantly in you. Had you been having doubts before that? Were
Yeah,
there
for
other
around
things like
two years.
was it biblical doubts? Was it moral, theological? Like what were the sort of the things that kind of cropped up for you?
Theological and political. Because I was starting to get into American politics around that time, and the gay marriage debate was really on
Right.
my mind. And I as somebody who has grown up in this modern secular world and just has been forced to go to church, the church was never really an integral part of my life. It was more of an integral part of my mother's life and other family members' lives. You know, these boomers who still lived in an age where the church was very important. I was so disconnected.
Sure.
And so it was just funny to see an institution that was alive during the medieval ages, get involved in a modern debate when it came to an issue of a secular government that has nothing to do with religious influence in the first place, trying to legislate policy. I found it to be kind of funny. I found
Yeah.
it to also be a giant contradiction, and so the kind of the seeds of doubt were already in by 2011 and 2012, and come 2013 when I watched that Bill Maher quote, that's when I lost it all. And I'm pretty lucky. There are a lot of people, maybe you're a good example of this, who were really devout, extremely devout Christians who had it way worse, who had maybe had some stuff going on in them psychologically afterwards, like losing their entire worldview, losing their entire belief system. I guess with me it wasn't as hard because I was already nearly there.
Sure, sure, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Talk about it like almost like it was a nominal cultural sort of. Yeah,
Yeah.
mine was definitely more worldview. I mean, in as far as you could be. Complete. It was traumatic, like to go
Right.
through the whole process and go through that. But yeah, I mean, I still think it's still difficult though once you've been raised in it, even if you were really in or really not, to be able to even just see an option where that's not, where you
Mhm.
can treat it as if it's not, as if it's an option, as if it's not mandated. So when you said when you got to high school, you wanted to start a chapter, that you said Secular Student Alliance, right? Or the
Secular Student Alliance, yeah.
yes, and you said you tried to start it and you had to go as far as getting the Freedom for Religion Foundation involved to get this done.
Yeah, I tried for around a year and a half to 2 years. Got caught in a lot of red tape and administrative processes where I didn't really know what my rights were. There's a very interesting piece of legislation that exists called the Equal Access Act, and it allows any high school student to form whatever club they want at any federally funded high school. Doesn't matter how much money the school has. Doesn't matter how much personnel an institution or a school might have. The club can exist. If you want to start a Black Lives Matter club or KKK club, the school has to provide resources for you to have that club. But I guess when you're in high school, you're far younger. You don't know your rights as much. You're kind of a child in a system that you've always been a part of. And so it took me a while to really realize how I could fight back easily, but I was going through that process and dealing with a lot of frustration. But this was around a time too when when the atheist movement was still fairly healthy, and this is right before Reason Rally 2, so right before the real downfall of new atheism. So I was in that moment where it was really cool to be a part of the Secular Student Alliance, really hip to form Secular Student Alliance chapters, to be in that counterculture. And eventually, yeah, I did get what I wanted. I got the Freedom from Religion Foundation involved, as well as a few other organizations that sent letters to the school district. And I got then flown out to Wisconsin, and I received a $5,000 check, a scholarship from Dan and Annie Laurie, and I was their 2015 Student of the Year, just based on based on my own persistence, which I find to be interesting. Although if I could go back, I'd change a few things. Number one, I get a haircut, and number two, I learned how to write a better speech. I was a big procrastinator back then, but I'm still still very glad and appreciative of what I did. But
So
that was my time in high school.
yeah, so did you was the place where you lived a fairly religious community? Like, were you like in the Bible Belt and that
Not the Bible Belt.
not quite, okay.
I live on Long Island in New York,
Okay.
but my area is fairly socially conservative.
Sure.
And the school district that I'm in is very socially conservative. Even among the Democrats, right, and the liberals that attend this institution and work at this institution, the vast majority of them are religious. And atheism, even in the 2010s, while it was hip and it was growing, it was mostly something that was growing amongst young people and not amongst baby boomers, not amongst Gen X. And so I was not surprised at all to see that opposition. Um, but I'm glad that I was able to eventually learn what my rights were, to get more involved and to fight back and win.
Do you think that having to fight through all that just deepened your resolve? Like, did you just kind of want to start this, and then by the end of it, you were like, "Wow, I see how badly this is needed," based on the resistance you got?
So I was already deep um, into the atheist movement. I was watching countless hours of content, old lectures from the 90s that have, that converted VHS tapes, David Silverman lectures, Dan Barker and Annie Laurie Gaylor giving speeches at their conventions, humanist talks, you name it, various counterculture YouTubers like Thunderfoot, Sargon of Akkad, and Jacqueline Glenn, and Atheism is Unstoppable. And so that was my life. I was the school atheist. And so
Yeah.
me forming the Secular Student Alliance chapter actually is just, in a militaristic way, me showing my service to the movement, me doing what I can on my little local high school level to enhance the movement, to grow it, and to make sure that it continues into the realm of success.
Yeah, and it turns out that ended up being, you end up with student of the year and ended up with all that opposition. And
Mhm.
isn't this so
Yeah.
funny that sometimes people want to keep things quiet, and yet by trying
Mhm.
to keep things quiet, they draw attention to it,
Yes.
and it just turns into this big old thing. Whereas if they hadn't have met it with so much resistance, who knows
I
the
would have
type
not,
of
I would have probably not gotten that scholarship,
yeah,
you know?
yeah, that's wild. Yeah, so during all this, let's see here. So you're working through all this, and you're non-religious. At what point did you inherit your political beliefs? Like, are your parents is this sort of their political outline, or did you also have a moment where did Bill Maher
Mhm.
also put you on to
I got
to
it. Mar also helped me with politics, but so when the atheist movement was very healthy, I was just when I my realm and interest in politics really just concerned issues relating to secularism, like Ten Commandments on the public square, the allowance of a high school atheist chapter, um, gay marriage, right? Because I really only see there are technically secular arguments against gay marriage, but I don't think they're strong enough as compared to, say, pro-life, secular arguments. So I would consider that to be one. So I was very passionate in the gay marriage debate, Ten Commandments on the public square debate, and just everything in the atheist movement. And so I ended up registering as a Democrat, at that time, solely because of those issues. I wasn't interested in any other issues whatsoever. Once I started to see the division, though, after graduating high school in the atheist movement, um, Atheism Plus, Elevator Gate, how that contributed to the downfall of the atheist movement that I saw at Reason Rally 2. Um, us losing millions upon millions of dollars, focusing on issues that have nothing to do with secularism or atheism at all, um, building bridges with one political group but not another political group due to personal political differences that have nothing to do with secularism. All these various concoctions, it made me also explore other political topics and political issues, that made me realize, I don't think I'm on the political left when it comes to the majority of American political topics. I'm on the right. And so, come around 2018, 2019, I started to really openly identify, especially to my friends and colleagues, as a Republican. But overall, my core values and what I fought for, even back in high school, still reign true to this day. I'm still a hardline secularist. I'm as militant of an atheist as you can get. I believe in a separation between church and state, but I also I'm not a fan of illegal immigration. I think we should have a wall on our southern border. I stand for gun rights. I stand for freedom of speech, which used to be a liberal issue in the 60s, but has now become a conservative issue today. I think that freedom of religion is very important too. Well, I always have believed that. So with a lot of these topics, I realized, okay, I'm with those evil, bad right wingers now, and that's how I kind of evolved in the realm of politics. My parents really had nothing to do with it. My mother is, I would say, pretty hardline conservative, and my father is, I would say, just a moderate. He's voted for Republicans. He's voted for Democrats. He doesn't like any extremism in any part of the political spectrum. And so when my parents also saw my political evolution, they kind of liked it. They kind of saw that I was also coming at it from an anti-extremism kind of perspective too. And in a way, I think it made them also respect my secular efforts as well. That they didn't see that I was just some random progressive pushing a progressive agenda. No, I care about secularism and atheism. I never joined the secular and atheist movement because I wanted to be, a progressive activist. I joined hand in hand with progressive activists during the age of the atheist movement because I put my atheism and secularism first. And I think that's a full roundabout when it comes to my politics now.
Yeah, yeah. And
Hmm.
so that kind of, you kind of touched on this, but it would seem that so much of the atheist community, especially now, and hopefully, and organizations like yours are doing the work to turn this around. But it would seem just the vast majority are overwhelmingly liberal and pretty, and usually far
Yeah.
left. It would
Yeah,
seem
not
to
even not
me,
even liberals. I would
not
argue like
yeah.
far leftists.
And I mean,
People. Yeah.
yeah, I've signed up for like newsletters for like Center for Inquiry, a lot of these like major organizations, and then I get
Hmm.
their newsletters, and I'm like, what? Like I,
That's
and then
not your
I
dad's Center for Inquiry. That's not even your Center for Inquiry from a few years ago.
no, and
It's yeah.
yeah, and I'll come into I'll see those articles, or I'll look at like my local chapter, and I'm just looking like what's on the books, like the book club, and like what the
Mhm.
meetings are about, and what you have to do or not do to go to the meetings. And I was, yeah, it's just, I was like, what is this seem to be the case? So I have my own theories about why this is, but what does Thomas Sheedy think about why is it that once people arrive at atheism, they seem to just naturally progress towards the left, even the far left?
So I think it has to do with a few things. I think it has to do with the past culture war that we were in. If you were an atheist back in the 90s, 80s, 2000s, even a small chunk of the 2010s, the early 2010s, you could say, you weren't really that welcomed on the right. I'll say that. You really were. You were seen as a degenerate. You were seen as a evil, satanic, materialist, secularist who didn't care at all about preserving the values of the republic. And so the left just happened at that time to be more welcoming to atheists than the right. Um, I'll also say that there's just if you look at Pew Research, if you look at various different polls, you'll just see that it always happens to skew left. And I think maybe it always will skew a little more left than right. But I would say back in the new atheist days, when the movement was very, very popular, when it was in its prime, when the four horsemen, all four of them were alive, Hitchens included, you would see Republicans and libertarians at some of these conventions. You would see the idea of atheists going to events like CPAC normalized. People were movement centric and they were reactionary because they wanted to make sure that this movement and the acceptance and normalization of atheists in the country was successful. People put that mindset first because if you're in the atheist movement, you want to make sure that you fight for atheist causes, and irrespective of whether you're on the political left and right. But once we started to accept radical feminism, once we started to accept social justice, the narrative of Black Lives Matter, and other issues that had nothing to do with the atheist movement, at atheist conferences, in atheist spaces, people pouring their mental problems as well into conferences and spaces, claiming that there were things happening at the conferences that really weren't happening. It led to our downfall. There was a Trojan horse that came in, We let the horse in thinking that they're full of a bunch of accepting people who wanted to change the world. Um, the movement died, and so the narrative too that if you're an atheist you have to be on the left is still now continually perpetuated, which is even worse now, because these people have gotten only more authoritarian, more anti-freedom, more anti-liberty in the process.
Yeah, I agree. So we've brought up the term new atheism a good few times.
Mhm.
So for those who might not know, um, tell us a little bit about new atheism. And you've mentioned the death of new atheism,
Yeah.
and you seem like you've defined it around this particular point. And I kind of always saw it as like sort of gradual die off, and you kind of identified this point. So maybe
Mhm.
talk a little bit about what new atheist is and how it came to be for maybe those who don't know.
Sure.
And then what was it that you saw as the death, specifically, that really kind of
Mhm.
cut it off?
So new atheism was a phenomenon in Western politics for the most part, and also swept across the world. Um, there was organized atheism always existed. If you look into the past in the 20th century, there were activists like Madeline Murray O'Hair and Anne Nicole Gaylor who were really, really seen as extremists back then, who were pushing the idea of atheist normalcy and separation of church and state, but they were in such a different environment and the marketing was different too. So if you were an atheist in 1998 or 1999, if you thought, or if you were a person paying attention to American politics, if you thought of atheists, you thought of Madeline Murray O'Hair, who got murdered and buried in an unmarked grave in Texas, with her bones scattered and only found a few years later because her murderer could avoid the death penalty. That was what was atheism. That was what atheism was in the 2000s on the most part. But then a few years in, especially post 9/11, there were four big authors that came into being. There was Sam Harris, there was the late Christopher Hitchens, there was Richard Dawkins, who's arguably the most famous atheist in the world, and there's Daniel Dennett. They produced four books that swept the West. I think all of them were New York Times bestsellers, and they ended up rejuvenating these former organized atheist entities that really died off due to things like Madeline's death and other stuff. It made atheism become more mainstream in the West. And so all these different organizations, 501c3 nonprofits like American Atheists, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the Secular Student Alliance, the Foundation Beyond Belief, um, numerous others, they ended up getting millions upon millions of dollars in funding thanks to the efforts of these four gentlemen. And numerous other intellectuals have popped up as well. It was a very interesting time, and there was a journalist in 2006 who called this phenomenon the new atheism. And I wish this phenomenon continued even into 2021, but it died out. Um, I think a little early in its infancy. So new atheism was really at its prime in the 2000s, going into even the early 2010s. We were getting millions upon millions of dollars. We were setting up meetup groups in local towns across the country. We were helping out ex-Muslims around the world, helping students form chapters at high school and college campuses. It was really cool to be an atheist at this time. And we were having these amazing conferences in the US, conferences in Canada, conferences in the UK. Well, there was also a conference that happened in 2011 in Ireland, the World Atheist Conference. This happened a little over 10 years ago. And at this conference, there was Richard Dawkins and a few other big speakers, but there also happened to be this speaker named Rebecca Watson. Rebecca Watson runs a blog called Skeptic, and she also has a YouTube channel. She hung out with a lot of people at this World Atheist Conference, and usually when you're at an atheist conference, you usually stay up till 4 in the morning at the hotel bar. Everyone usually gathers there, and then when people get tired, they gradually move up to their rooms. Well, here comes 4 a.m., and Watson decides to go to her room. There's a gentleman that happens to follow her into the elevator, and while they are in the elevator, the gentleman kindly asks, this is apparently according to accounts that Watson actually made, would you like to come back to my room for a cup of coffee? She says no. Um, and he consensually leaves the elevator, and then later on she leaves the elevator to go to her room. They both go to each other's rooms. I don't know if they talk again or whatever. You know, polite, ask for sex, declined, whatever. It happens all the time at conferences. Well, Watson later on blogged and then made a video and said that this is an example of sexism in the atheist movement. That this is an example of systemic sexism and misogyny everywhere. That if you go to an atheist conference, these evil men who like to request request you for coffee in the room, that's the evidence of rape culture right there. I'm kind of exaggerating things a little bit, but this was a movement that ended up sprouting within the prime of new atheism called Atheism Plus, and you had numerous far left, what you would argue today as woke bloggers and activists claiming to these established and growing nonprofits that your conferences are filled with sexism and racism. You have too many men, or you have too many white people, or you have too many people with this background or that background, and therefore that must mean that there is bigotry somewhere at your atheist event. And what these people ended up doing is they ended up saying, okay, we're the real progressives. We're the people who want real change, and we want to improve your events. Please put us on your boards. Give us time on your podcasts. Let us blog for your organizations. Give us power. Give us power. And even though these people originally started out as just mere bloggers attacking the atheist movement on the side, a few years later, come 2016, June of 2016, these people took over the entire organized atheist movement in the United States. What was New Atheism, a really rich, healthy movement sweeping the modern world, died because of this infiltration. And around that time, I just graduated high school. I wanted to get more involved in this New Atheist movement. I spent years and years and years obsessing about this community, only to see it die. That's ridiculous. Atheism is growing. Religion is shrinking. Religious extremism is still a problem. People still haven't been accepted in the world, and even in this country, for being atheists. We have a lot more work to do. And so I was frustrated. Come 2016 and into 17 and 18, I was asking all these atheist organizers around the nation what happened. Why did we fail at Reason Rally 2? One official in the Reason Rally Coalition secretly came up to me, whispered into my ear that it was social justice that was the problem. And so I ended up not feeling so good about that. I ended up just going back to Long Island and building my local group and doing things my way. But I knew that I was doing it in a post-New Atheism. And I knew that we needed a new movement, though, a new rush. Something again with that reactionary flavor to kickstart this fight for godless acceptance in the country and around the world, and to do things differently than what a lot of these organizations did, to not let the Trojan horse back in, and so to continue on what was New Atheism. I founded Atheists for Liberty. And that's what New Atheism is. Very long explanation along with a long rant. Probably going into the next question or two that you're probably going to ask me. But that's what New Atheism was, and New Atheism died because of wokeism. Wokeism killed it. It was called third wave feminism back then. It might have been called fourth wave feminism, critical social justice, Black Lives Matter acceptance, transhumanism, whatever whatever they call it. There were a lot of different terms. Stuff like that led to the collapse of a apolitical, vibrant, reactionary, awesome movement that was in the process of changing the entire world.
Yeah, so I think it's very interesting. I've seen the change within certain of these organizations, and sort of you don't see, I feel like, quite as many conferences as you used to. They don't seem to attract the same sort of attention. And I think part of that, of course, has to do with COVID. But also it was before that, though, like you're saying, it was very clearly.
Since 2016, the numbers went down, right? That was 4 years before the coronavirus pandemic.
Right.
So
and yet simultaneously we have, there's a book coming out, I believe, in just a month or two. If it's maybe it already came out. It was about the rise of the nuns. So NONES, the nuns.
Yes.
And about how, this is an ever increasing, quote unquote, religious demographic of people that are the fastest rising religious demographic in the United States.
And come 2016 and 17, there was no established, strong, healthy force to mold the growth of the nuns into a voting bloc, into a vibrant, established, I wouldn't say entity, but established thing, for lack of a better word, in the United States. It wasn't there because the movement died. So I was really worried. I continued to look at Pew Research. I continued to look at data. I continued to see that these numbers are not changing at all. Why are we going to let a bunch of social justice hacks um, end up killing the molding of the largest demographic by a factor of 10 in the United States, the largest growing demographic, especially among our generation? Um, it's not changing. The nuns are growing.
Yeah, and I think it's I think it's unfortunate in some ways that the atheist movement has been hijacked so entirely by
Mm-hmm.
politics. It's almost as if you can't divorce the two. Sometimes I wonder if you even can. And it's also you'd think no one has ever read Ayn Rand either. But part of this I think is an interesting. I've read about this in the past. Do you think there's this difficulty in getting atheists organized because of the type of people who become atheists? In that so many of us tend to be very individualistic, um, very much just kind of want to, we don't want to wake up and go somewhere on Sunday morning and gather with a bunch of people and all repeat the same thing all the time because we don't need that sort of repetitive assurance. And I've heard people talk about that. So do you think that that's the case and that it will always be difficult to organize non-believers, or do you think that that's not
I
much
don't
of a
think that's the case,
roadblock?
actually. I think you could make that argument in maybe some of the early years of atheism, because atheism, because it wasn't part of the norm, it was seen as odd. And so atheism and atheist events sometimes did attract odd people, right? Inside the atheist community, you had the Gamergate debate and the some of the femcel v incel the weirdness happening also within some of our stuff. You automatically do get outsiders, people that are abnormal, at least within the context of society, coming into some of these reactionary movements. But overall, not really, because when New Atheism was healthy, we were filling up entire stadiums. You had entire 501c3 organizations making millions upon millions of dollars. We had healthy structures. So, if anything, I find this to be weird, because if that argument is true, then you would think that we'd be successful now and that we wouldn't have been successful in the 2000s and into the 2010s. So I don't I yes, there are some things about atheists that maybe do make organizing atheists difficult, but not so difficult to where it's impossible, because the past has been able to show that it's been successful. But social justice made it a problem. That was a real problem.
Yeah.
If wokeism wasn't a factor, I think the atheist movement would still be fairly healthy as a counterculture.
Do you think another like sort of blocker may be that atheism is still very difficult to make or develop a voting pattern off of, in that I still see issues, a lot of issues, and it's usually from Democrats, ones that are still, I think, reasonable and
Mhm.
great thinkers that are doing that are doing great work, and then but then also when you start looking at a lot of it, I find myself very much wanting to vote Republican. So much, in fact, that is like
Yeah.
where I tend to lean now. Despite what was 4 years ago, I was wanting to support Bernie, and
Right.
it's just, it seems it's gone since 2016. It just seems it's the political landscape has changed
Mhm.
so much, but now it's almost difficult to. It just depends, I guess, which particular issue, if you become a one voter issue, I guess, to make you
Mhm.
go Democrat or go Republican. So do you think
So
that's the
this is entirely based on the movement and who owns it. We have something great actually in Washington right now. I don't know if you've heard of this. We have something called the Congressional Free Thought Caucus in the U.S. House of Representatives.
yes?
It's filled with numerous members of Congress from various areas of the country. So we have we have diversity in gender there. We have diversity in race. We have diversity in geographic. We don't have diversity of thought, however, in Congressional Free Thought Caucus because every single member of this caucus is part of the Democratic Party, and they lean progressive. That's a problem. And it has nothing to do, on the most part, with Republicans just being more religious. Yes, Republicans are more religious. The GOP, yes, is more religious compared to the DNC. It has to do with the fact that you have people in these structures, in these positions, that haven't engaged in enough outreach to the right. It started to happen a little bit in 2014, 15, and 16. David Silverman, who's the former president of American Atheists, he took American Atheists when he was president of that organization to CPAC. He actually did what I am doing now, normalizing the idea that you could be an atheist and be a conservative. If the movement ended up splitting their resources 50-50, half of it to engaging the left, half of it to engaging the right, you would have a decent base and even a few potentially House members, or maybe not yet House members, maybe give it a few years, but people in state legislatures at least and local politics who are members of the Republican Party who would be out right now supporting secular policies in the country. But because the woke people own the movement, the minority of normal people that might still be in the closet or in the shadows of the movement trying to keep some portions of it alive, they can't do that. So it has it has nearly all to do with administrative decisions. And this is why when I go on nearly every single interview to talk about issues like this and to talk about Atheists for Liberty, I go at it from a nonprofit administrative perspective. Because you'd be surprised how little social justice-y and gender quota and racial quota decisions that are made in local old 1990s-like offices that we still happen to own can impact entire cultural trends in the country. And that's exactly what happened. That's why I want to see organizations like Atheists for Liberty grow. I want to see more nonpartisan efforts happen to make secularism more normalized in the country, because then you won't have that problem. You will have atheists who proudly vote Republican, who are also out of the closet about where they stand, even today in this new culture war.
Yeah, I think that's a great and worthy goal. I think probably what strikes me is also a limiting factor, and that the Free Thought Caucus, which I was thinking of when I was talking about many of the Democrats who I admire, I wonder if there's still even now that stigma amongst Republicans that if they openly associate themselves with something that is at all secular, if they're going to take a major hit in their voting bloc. Do you think that's the case? Have you heard from anyone even in government who is afraid of that, or they truly have said, I've tried to join and I cannot get in?
Well, to answer that, the answer is yes. We actually have heard that. And that is the exact reason why our programs and our infrastructure at Atheists for Liberty needs to improve. It's why we have this established entity here. We know people in media and in government who want to be out, who want to, support things like this, but the infrastructure simply doesn't exist. Why? Because the organizations that have existed for decades, who still have those $1 million budgets, they don't want to do it. Why? Because they care about social justice more than the mission of normalizing atheism. If they cared about the mission of normalizing atheism, then there might be Republicans on the Free Thought Caucus right now.
Yeah, I think that could be the case, and
that's possible. I've been to Lobby Day. I've been to Secular Lobby Day on Capitol Hill. I know what needs to be done. And I know that if enough resources were put into various different initiatives and endeavors, and I operate in the GOP too, I know that this can succeed. I'm just the loudest one right now, openly, at least in public, admitting it.
Yeah, I agree. I think just even amongst myself, I know a fair amount of people who are non-religious, but they don't subscribe to wokeism, and they don't want anything to do with it. And they're just wondering, what in the world am I supposed to do? Because they feel, because a lot of these, like, I consider myself liberal on lots of issues, pro-gay marriage, pro-legalizing marijuana, like so many of these things that are, would have put me on the left, but then there's so much that pushes me back the other way. But I think, I truly think that if the Republican Party, and they've already started to do this, I do believe, but would, just knock it off with some of the, the religious right would just tone it down and just continue to try to focus on being the party of the working class and on just accepting, people regardless of religious affiliation.
And if they say, "Hey, we're not doing the social justice stuff. We're not the crazies over here. Come join us." Right? We're going to accept you. We have religious diversity. Imagine if they went more in line with the anti-wokeness.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look
You
at
know?
Virginia.
Yeah. A
What
lot of
happened there?
anti-CRT activists got involved in the Greg Youngkin race, the
Yes.
Youngkin race in Virginia, and that's what made Republicans win there.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was actually here. I'm about to admit this publicly. I was actually just at the National Conservatism Conference.
Conference. Oh,
The
great. I
just
wanted to go there. I wasn't able to.
I was looking. I thought maybe I'd see you, and I was like, if he doesn't
I
reply to
wish I
my
could have gone.
yeah, I was like, if he
Yeah.
doesn't reply to my email, if he's at this conference, I'm gonna find him. But I think by then you guys had already reached back out.
Yes.
But yeah, and it was very interesting to to get to talk to a lot of different people,
Mhm.
and I could just tell even from just it was still majority religious, but
But it's becoming secular.
yes,
You have this young Zoomer kind of anti-wokeism, anti-feminism flavor that automatically has a secular tone. Even with you, even if you go to Turning Point USA conferences with Charlie Kirk pretending to be a pastor on stage, right? He's an evangelical Christian. I'm just joking, but he is an evangelical. But
yeah,
you have the secular undertones that are there. You go to CPAC, secular undertones. You go to Freedom Fest, secular undertones. It's new. It literally is the perfect breeding ground for things like Atheists for Liberty. So when I started going to CPAC on my own, when I started going to the Turning Point Student Action Summit on my own, I felt like I was at an American Atheist Convention when it was healthy. I felt like I was at the Reason Rally again, if I was at the 2012 Reason Rally, rather.
yeah,
And so I knew we got to set up Atheists for Liberty in this current culture war with right now in this environment. We can grow and generate we can grow and generate a non-biased, nonpartisan atheist organization. We can also establish the idea of an atheist right too, but by establishing ourselves right now in this culture war. The literal difference, though, right now between them still talking about religion stuff and them versus them talking about secular stuff more in just a few years, 4 or 5 years from now, is resources. Hence why we need more people right now to join Atheists for Liberty, to get on our volunteer committees, to get on and bulking up our programs, because it's really important. People's involvement in what we are doing right now, and I operate in all these places. I run Turning Point chapters. I know the people who run CPAC. I know some of the people who run National Conservatism Conference. I know exactly what needs to happen here, but we need more people in the fight. That's what's going to get atheism normalized on the right faster, and thus normalize atheism normalized around the country, because you have normalized atheism on the left and the right, then boom, we have a purely secular country with no theocratic efforts really bolstered up. We got to get this process started. It means people getting more involved now.
yeah.
And these conferences are great places for us to really get more people. And National Conservatism was I heard it was a great event. I wish I could have been there.
Yeah, it was lovely. You could see the clash as well between the two groups, because then
Yeah.
the whole dialogue of the conference was surrounded a lot about, let's put aside a lot of these differences and first just come together on even just a broad political
Yeah.
and not even just political but principles, just these broad principles.
Yeah.
um you know
That gives way for secularism.
yeah, and you had on stage during the primary night, two deeply religious individuals, and then you had Douglas Murray.
Atheist.
Yeah, yes, yeah, who defines himself, last I saw, as a Christian atheist. Although I did hear him recently say he wished it were true, which I found interesting. And
Yes.
um,
Which that's one of my few disagreements with him. I think that only hinders our efforts. I think he's sincere, and I think he's awesome. I admire him, but I'm just not a fan of the Christian atheism kind of thing, because then it makes it look like atheism is a bad thing,
yeah,
which it isn't.
I'm sort of mixed on it to a degree. But the other individual on the stage was Dave Rubin. So here you
Yes.
have, and who
Also from the originally involved somewhat in our movement.
yeah, and was non-religious. I don't know what he is now. I think he's pseudo-religious. Maybe I can't recall what his most recent spiritual update was. But still, two
Yeah.
people, both individuals who are gay, which, here on stage at a conference filled with
Yeah.
Republicans and libertarians, and I
And
think
with
can
secular backgrounds.
yes, with secular backgrounds, and were the two main speakers on stage with
Mhm.
these other two individuals. So I thought that was very encouraging as well. So yeah, I think that's a. And going back just a little bit, just to touch on the idea, just because I think it's an interesting topic. Um, the idea of the Christian atheist. So um, I have this still have this great interest in religion and in biblical
Mhm.
text and biblical studies and criticism. That's why I stayed on a university, and that's part of the
Mhm.
background of this podcast and such. So to me, I have this great admiration still for the Bible. I take this it as a I still have a great love even for the Bible and for these religious
Yeah.
texts. And I don't fully accept the kind of broad paint stroke that is, religion is constantly at all times has been a source of evil. It's never contributed anything. It's never given anything of interest. And so the idea of like this Christian atheism in this, I see a lot of that in alignment with like the conservative movement to a degree. So do you still, you're at this point in your life, I guess this is more of an individual question. Do you find at any way like value in scripture or value in some of these religious traditions, even if you don't accept the dogma of them, whether it be just the moral backgrounds or some of the teachings, or what's kind of your feeling on that?
One of the reasons I think Jordan Peterson, I think, was so popular in his upcoming fame 2017 onwards is he was able to popularize scripture and popularize religious texts and stories in a secular world. Because even though Peterson is seen as like this Christian figure, he really is actually a little more secular than people may think. Like I remember Matt Dillahunty asking him a few years ago at a Pangburn philosophy event, like, do you literally believe in the acceptance of God and Jesus? That they actually literally exist? He said no. He basically said no. I think he's basically actually an atheist, who thinks, who personally thinks that humans need religion. I think he personally, as an individual, knows of the conclusions of the universe that we really don't know if God actually exists or not, but that he's afraid of humanity taking that leap because he might think, maybe he thinks that humans, with their animal instincts and with their need for stories, can't make that full leap into atheism. The problem is that doesn't matter because the statistics are showing that we're leaping into it anyways. That is the conclusion of where Western society is going, at least,
Yeah,
and where a good chunk of humanity is going.
yeah,
I do see some value in scripture. I do see value in stories all throughout human history, not just the Bible, but various other religious texts, and various other mythologies around the world. My only issue, and this is my big issue, especially as an atheist activist, is I want to see the idea of being an atheist normalized. In conservatism, in the United States, wherever you go, that you won't face a stigma just for not believing in God. And my problem with this Christian atheist title is that it makes it look like atheism is a bad thing. That automatically Christianity must be automatically good, automatically awesome. That, see, even atheists love Christianity. And therefore it perpetuates the narrative that if you are a godless person and you don't have any spiritual or religious foundation, that you're not really a moral person, or some could say you're not really conservative, or you're not really in favor of liberty, or whatever. And that's my problem. It delays the normalization of atheism in these spaces that are so desperately needed for us to be in. And that's my real problem.
yeah,
I understand where Douglas Murray is coming from. And by the way, I admire the man. This is somebody who I would love to get on our advisory board. Like
yeah,
that's how much I deeply respect Douglas Murray. But I just think that that's really bad strategy. Identifying as a Christian, I think it's also disrespectful to Christians. I live with Christians. I grew up as a Christian, even though I wasn't as fervent in faith as others were. To be a Christian is to accept, that God exists, that Yahweh is a thing, and that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. a literal divine son of Yahweh, and that also that you have the Holy Spirit and whatnot. You know, denying that and then just using, Christian as a label, even though you don't believe that, I actually view that as kind of disrespectful to actual believers who I do carry a great amount of respect for and agreement on when it comes to non-theological issues. I'm not a
Yeah.
Christian, so I don't identify as one.
Yeah.
I don't believe in God and I don't believe in Jesus.
Yeah.
So that is it would be disrespectful to the Christians I know if I called myself one. And that's my so I think it delays the progress of the normalization of atheism and secularism on the right and in other spaces we're going into. And I also think it's disrespectful to Christians. And so that's
Yeah.
my full take on that.
Yeah. Yeah. It would seem that it is of course, a bit of an oxymoron. And I kind of see what he's doing when he talks about that there. You mentioned Jordan Peterson. I also I really admire Jordan Peterson.
As do
Saw
I.
saw him speak in person.
Mhm.
Once I actually have a signed poster up on the wall there. Rule 8, excuse me, for those who are in the know. Um,
Mhm.
but I really appreciate what he's done in terms of presenting biblical stories, but from a secular narrative. Because really, yeah, he's never crossed that line. He's clearly has engagement with these stories. But there's a
Mhm.
reason you still see comments like praying for Jordan Peterson and his family
Right.
in YouTube
Because they know
videos.
he is this secular Western man of science, atheistic guy who happens to sympathize with the Christians.
Yeah, I think he sees a lot of value in those stories, and to a degree, rightly so.
Mhm.
But what you said about delaying the acceptance, I think that's true, and not just in the United States.
Mhm.
And you mentioned this earlier, but abroad, especially in countries that are Islamic in nature. Um,
Yes.
but I think we have to a degree, of course, do it here first before we can then. I hate to say export, but before we can, it's almost, I don't want to. I'm not gonna say export. I want to say it's like setting an example.
Right.
This is something that should be allowed. And to me, that's a dear issue to my heart, because I had my own experience and it was hard enough as it was in the United
Right.
States, which means it wasn't difficult in the grand
Mhm.
scheme of things. And I just can't even fathom the
Mhm.
people around the globe who have these incredible experiences, just incredibly difficult experiences in terms of not being able to even think the
Right.
way they want to think, not even having the option to go and find a community. Thank goodness for the internet. That is beginning to be a portal for people. If you spend any time on the ex-Muslim Reddit page, I mean, it's
It's
wild,
it's wild. I've had,
wild.
and it's annoying for us, that we can't always help these people because Atheists for Liberty, we don't operate internationally. We don't have the resources to do it. We are trying to rebuild the American atheist movement. But we are partnered with many other organizations, and we have friends in other places around the world who are working as hard as they can to help atheists in need. And this is my issue. I don't want to normalize the idea that being an atheist is a bad thing. Oh, because we're in a new culture war, because atheism was so 2012 or it was so 2015, and now we're talking about these issues. So let's not really call ourselves atheists anymore because it's not cool to call yourself an atheist anymore. Think about this though. Atheism is still growing. The nuns are still a thing, even though it might sound so 2013. That statistic from 2013 hasn't changed. Um, and there are people literally being killed around the world simply because they don't believe in an invisible magic man in the sky, because they don't believe in a god. That's crazy. That's a violation of human rights.
Yeah.
And more institutions, organizations, and individuals need to do something about this. And you're right. We do need to set that example here at home.
Yeah, and to that point, I saw on your website, just looking over it again yesterday, you were talking about like these blue laws that are still in place, or blasphemy laws that are still on the books, even in the United States, even though of course they're not enforced. But the fact that they're even on the books,
So stupid.
I, that's just, to me, that's embarrassing. I mean,
And that's why secular activism, even in government, even in state legislatures, is still a necessary thing. Yes, we need to oppose blasphemy laws happening in other parts of the world, in the old world, but there is still lots of stuff, even if it looks so 1.0, that does need to happen here, you know. And we are an organization that's trying to do that. We're trying to build the infrastructure and build the resources to make these programs that we can engage in to defend people's, you know, right to not believe, um, necessary and proper.
Yeah, I completely agree. So one of the great themes of this, one of the great inspirations, I should say, for this project, and this is I've read about this on my blog. For me in my own life was Christopher Hitchens, um, and has meant more to me on an intellectual level than any other person I've come across in my reading. And he wasn't the first person I came across, and he certainly hasn't been the last, but has certainly been the most meaningful, not just in his conversations about religion, but just in his personhood. So
Mhm.
you could talk about maybe I almost have to bring up Hitch. It's almost become a theme now. But
Please.
did Hitch have a strong impact on you, or if one of the other new atheists did? Who was it that really you really admired?
So I'll mention others, but on Christopher Hitchens, it's been nearly 10 years since his passing. In a month, it will be 10 years since he
Yeah,
died of cancer. And I think the world has not been, at least the world of religion, on the most part, hasn't changed. I feel like we need him now more than ever, right now. And I think there are plenty of people in politics, philosophy, and religion that would agree with me on that point. I discovered who Christopher Hitchens was a few years after his death. Um, I wanted to, when I was still a child, around 15, 16, I wanted to get a copy of God Is Not Great, and I wanted to really dive deep into the book. I wasn't making money back then, though, so I had to get my parents to buy the book. Um, uh, my father, however, didn't want to publicly give me the money in front of my mother because she knew my mother would have a fit and would want me to throw it in the dumpster. But I ended up getting the book anyways, eventually, and reading it and diving deep into it and watching countless hours of lectures from the man in debates, and I admire him deeply. He is, out of all four horsemen, I admire him the most. Um, and I hope he is remembered throughout the centuries for his contributions to political discourse and thought, and religious discourse and thought. There are also other people who I've looked up to and revered. Some if you look at my past podcast interviews, I've mentioned David Silverman quite a lot.
right.
I'm actually interviewing him. I think this is being recorded and not live streamed, but as of tomorrow, from the day that this is being recorded, I'm actually interviewing
Yeah,
David Silverman, former president of American Atheists. He ended up getting ruined and removed from the movement due to this woke infiltration. I'm interviewing him tomorrow in the future of nonprofit atheism, and he was a great. He really impacted my life because I modeled my activism when I was leading local groups off of his activism, and even some of what I do at AFL, I model it off of what he used to do at American Atheists. I really do admire that man. He is like the activist nonprofit version of Christopher Hitchens in all respects. But also I commend people like Richard Dawkins, who have stood up against lots and lots and lots of scrutiny, especially in recent times. These bogus, pathetic claims by these pathetic individuals, these disgusting cretins, calling him such a bigot and such an evil guy, trying to ruin and damage what little left he has of his career after he made such a strong impact on the world, calling him some transphobe or whatever the hell. These people are bonkers. Um, the moment you let half of these people in, of course the movement's going to die. But I admire Dawkins very, very deeply as well. He is the most famous atheist in the world, and he has contributed to the acceptance of atheism more than anybody else, I would argue, in world history. Sam Harris, of course, taking on radical Islam, especially in 2014 through 16, 17, not giving a damn about politically correct nonsense, and the stupid claims that you have Salon and Slade and other sources paint him as Islamophobe bigot who wants to nuke the Middle East or whatever the hell. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
That one paragraph in the end of Faith, he will never live down.
oh, no.
He'll never get out from underneath the shadow that is
But you know what?
cast.
Maybe he should. Maybe he should just continue to fight where he stands. And
I
I
don't
that's why
blame
I've also always admired Sam Harris, even though maybe him and I might have a few political disagreements. But there are also so many others. Like Douglas Murray is a good one. Um, Looking at the old works of Madeline Murray O'Hare when she ran American Atheists, despite her imperfections, she had some problems. Sean Faircloth, when he was one of the executives behind the Secular Coalition for America back in the early 2010s. Student activists like Jessica Alquist, who, very similar to me, fought for her rights in high school when she was in Rhode Island. Lots of people I've admired, but boy, this is bringing me back. These are my days, and it's
Yeah.
pretty much all these people who I listed and countless others who really shaped me as a person and who I am today. My life is atheist activism. My life is secular activism. My life is these two culture wars. You know, the culture war against religious dogma and the acceptance of atheists, and now the culture war against social justice and political correctness and wokeism and CRT. You know, these people got me. Oh, and Bill Maher. I'll cite Bill Maher as well. These people got me to where I am politically, intellectually, culturally, internally, to do the best that I can every single day to save our civilization.
Yeah. So,
Hitchens being a good one, right at the top of
yeah,
the list.
yeah, absolutely. So for the time being now, so we're coming into 20, we're almost to 2022. Somehow,
Yep,
some way, unbelievable how quickly
I know.
this year goes by. I think it's just a symptom of getting older, probably, but also I think a symptom of just the COVID and all that. But what are you passionate about now? Like, what is your primary area of focus? You've mentioned a few things, but where is it that you are really trying to drive Atheists for Liberty? What's getting Thomas out of bed every morning and putting
What's
him to
getting me out of
work?
bed right now are changes that we're making in Atheists for Liberty. We have expanded a bunch of programs that we're doing already. We have a live streaming series that we do every other Thursday where we're interviewing very famous guests from all over the culture war. We're trying to really establish a very nice, rich profile here on the net. Once we do that, once our membership programs start to increase in value, we will have even more resources to put into conference exhibitions, engaging in our own events in real life, um, maybe even establishing chapter programs. The beginning of AFL is really still here, but we've entered a whole new renaissance, and that thrill of what we have coming up, even in just the near future, really does get me out of bed in the morning.
That's great. That's great. So where can people find you online? Like I know you mentioned, Atheists for Liberty. Are there other outlets or other places people
Yes,
can
so
roll up?
Atheists for Liberty. Well, lastly, I want to say again, thank you so much for having me on the program. This was awesome. I really appreciate the chat. If you ever want me on again, let me know. We could try to fit it in. I don't think that'll be a problem whatsoever. I really did enjoy this interview a lot. One of my favorites, actually.
That's
Um,
great.
so I really appreciate that, Riley, because you and I seem to have very similar backgrounds, at least as to how we came to where we are today. You can find Atheist for Liberty at atheistforliberty.org. Please, everybody, if you're watching this, join Atheist for Liberty. It's $1 a month, $12 a year for our standard membership. All the membership benefits are on our website. You can click the Join Us button right in the center of the home page and get involved with what we do. You'll get access to our Facebook members group. You'll get access to our Discord server. You'll be able to join our volunteer committees. Be a part of what we're trying to do here, both in person and online. And again, that is $12 a year, $1 a month. Okay, and if you want to donate even more, you can. We're a 501c3 501c3 nonprofit organization. We stand for free speech, free thinking, and freedom for all. We really want to do what we can to win the culture war here. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Getter, um, YouTube. Pretty much every social media platform you can think of, we have a presence on the vast majority of these platforms. You can find us at Atheist Liberty. Again, that's at Atheist Liberty. That's where you can find us. If you're interested in me, I'm getting involved in various sectors of politics, culture, and I'm trying to bring AFL into nearly every sector as to where I am. You can find me at Sheedy Tom.
Hey everybody, Riley here. I wanted to quickly say the last 30 seconds or so of the podcast, just us saying goodbye, was corrupted both the audio and video. So big thanks to Thomas for coming on the show, and I'll see you all in the next episode.